The midday sun over Jerusalem glinted off the polished brass of the ceremonial band as the drums began to roll. Their steady rhythm echoed across the courtyard of the Prime Minister's office, where red carpets had been laid and flags of two nations fluttered side by side, Israel and the United States. The air was formal but warm, filled with the distinct hum of anticipation that always accompanies a high-level visit. As the band played, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his wife, Sarah, stepped forward, greeting the visiting couple, US Vice President J.D. Vance and his wife, Usha. The exchange was measured but friendly, handshakes, nods, smiles, the kind of quiet choreography that defines diplomatic ceremony. Cameras clicked in bursts as the two leaders faced each other. The elder Israeli statesman and the rising conservative voice from Washington, who, in the span of months, had become one of President Donald Trump's most trusted envoys. For both men, the stakes were clear. The visit was not simply symbolic. It came amid a delicate moment. The ceasefire in Gaza was holding, but just barely. Negotiations between Israel, Hamas, and the mediating nations had entered their most fragile phase yet. Each day without violence was a small victory, but also a test of endurance and restraint. As the two leaders moved toward the entrance of the Prime Minister's office, Netanyahu paused briefly for the cameras. Behind him, the Israeli flag rippled against the white stone walls. At his side, Vance spoke quietly, his tone measured yet confident. "We are very optimistic," he said, referring to the ceasefire agreement brokered weeks earlier with US pressure and Qatari mediation. "This is a moment that requires not only strength, but patience." Inside, the tone shifted from ceremony to conversation. The entourage, aides, translators, and security officials took their places along the polished conference table. The flags of both nations stood side by side. Netanyahu began the meeting by welcoming his guest. His voice, calm but deliberate, carried the weight of decades spent navigating crises. "We value the United States' support," he said, looking directly at Vance, "and we know how deeply you understand what's at stake here for Israel's security, for regional stability, and for peace." Vance nodded, taking notes as Netanyahu spoke. It was clear that Washington's message was one of cautious encouragement. The Biden years had often been marked by tension and hesitation in the US-Israel relationship. Now, with the Trump administration back in power, the tone was assertive, sometimes even blunt. But Vance's visit carried a softer edge, reassurance rather than rebuke, partnership rather than pressure. During the lunch that followed, the two couples sat together in the private dining room of the Prime Minister's office. The cameras captured them in relaxed conversation. Netanyahu gesturing with his hands, Vance listening intently, Usha smiling as Sarah Netanyahu offered a few words in English. Behind them, servers moved quietly, arranging plates of grilled fish, salads, and fresh bread. The atmosphere seemed cordial, but everyone in the room knew the conversations carried heavier meaning. Outside the compound, the world watched closely. The ceasefire in Gaza was less than 3 weeks old, its terms still under dispute. Hamas had yet to complete the first phase of disarmament promised under the US-brokered deal. Aid convoys were moving through Kerem Shalom, but reports of sporadic rocket fire near Rafah had unsettled the fragile calm. Every move, every meeting in Jerusalem was being interpreted through that lens. Was the ceasefire solidifying or slipping away? For Netanyahu, the visit from Vance was a chance to reinforce the message that Israel remained in control, that the government was managing the post-war transition on its own terms. For Vance, it was an opportunity to project steady US oversight, proof that Washington was engaged, invested, and unwilling to let the process unravel. At one point, as the cameras were briefly allowed back in, Vance leaned toward Netanyahu and said quietly but audibly, "We know the cost of this peace, and we know the cost of losing it." The line was brief, but it landed, a signal to both allies and adversaries that Washington's patience had limits. Throughout the afternoon, the two delegations discussed the key points of the ceasefire framework: the phased return of hostages, the gradual demilitarization of Hamas, and the international supervision of reconstruction in Gaza. Netanyahu's national security advisor emphasized that Israel would not tolerate any breach of the agreement's terms. Vance listened, occasionally interjecting with questions about verification, humanitarian access, and the timing of border reopenings. Behind the diplomatic phrasing, there was also politics at play. Netanyahu, facing domestic pressure from both hawkish ministers and grieving families, needed to show that the United States stood firmly beside him. Vance, representing a Trump administration eager to demonstrate competence and global leadership, needed visible progress, a sign that the White House's approach to the Middle East was delivering tangible results. Later, as they moved to a smaller conference room for a bilateral briefing, the tone became more strategic. Intelligence officers presented updated maps of Gaza's security zones, highlighting areas cleared by Israeli forces and regions still under international supervision. Humanitarian corridors, they explained, were being expanded under UN monitoring, but sporadic resistance from local armed cells remained a challenge. Vance listened closely, occasionally conferring with his own defense attaché. He was keenly aware that every figure, every report would make its way back to the Situation Room in Washington. Outside, the late afternoon light turned the Jerusalem skyline a golden hue. The old city shimmered in the distance. The official photographers captured the two men once again, this time walking side by side through the garden of the Prime Minister's compound. Their expressions were calm, their gestures measured, the image of partnership that both leaders wanted to project. Reporters shouted questions as they approached the podium for brief statements. Netanyahu spoke first. "This visit," he said, "comes at a time when peace is being tested. But we have shown, together with our allies, that we are determined to maintain stability and security for our people." He thanked the US administration for its unwavering support and emphasized that Israel's actions would always be guided by its right to defend itself. Then came Vance's turn. He adjusted the microphone slightly, glanced toward the Israeli flag, and began. "I'm here on behalf of President Trump and the American people to reaffirm our commitment to the ceasefire, to Israel's security, and to the broader goal of lasting peace in this region." His voice was even, his tone deliberate. "We are very optimistic about maintaining the ceasefire," he said, repeating the phrase that would headline international coverage that evening. But optimism alone is not enough. It requires accountability. From all sides, he paused for effect before continuing. "The people of Gaza deserve stability. The people of Israel deserve safety, and both will only come when commitments are honoured and violence truly ends." The words echoed across the courtyard, blending with the faint sound of the band preparing once more to play. As the ceremony concluded, the two men shook hands again, a gesture that had been rehearsed and anticipated but still carried significance. Around them, aides and journalists captured every frame, every nod. The optics mattered. The message mattered even more. By nightfall, as the motorcade left the Prime Minister's compound and wound its way toward the King David Hotel, the day's headlines were already forming. Vance meets Netanyahu, urges continued calm, US optimistic on Gaza truce. For Israel, it was a reaffirmation of American backing. For Washington, a demonstration that its diplomatic footprint in the Middle East was once again visible and active. Yet beneath the formal statements and warm words, the challenges remained. Fragile borders, volatile politics, and a population still recovering from months of destruction. As the lights of Jerusalem faded behind him, Vice President Vance could only hope that his optimism, echoed so publicly, would hold against the region's long history of broken truces and renewed fire. The next morning, Israeli newspapers would print the photographs, Netanyahu and Vance standing shoulder to shoulder, their wives beside them, the flags aligned perfectly in the background. A single caption beneath the image captured the delicate balance of the moment, allies in peace for now.
Yes, thanks for having us. Thank you so much.
Welcome. Okay.